Imagine a tank so large, so heavily armored, that it looked more like a moving bunker than a weapon of war. A vehicle so heavy, it couldn't even cross most bridges. This is the story of the T28 Super Heavy Tank, one of the most extreme and ambitious tank designs ever conceived by the United States during World War II. The Second World War was a time of rapid evolution in armored warfare. At the start of the conflict, tanks were relatively small and lightly armored. But by the mid-1940s, the battlefield had changed. Heavy German fortifications, like the Siegfried Line, presented formidable obstacles. The Allies knew they needed something powerful enough to punch through fortified defenses, something beyond any ordinary tank. The project began in 1943, when the U.S. Army Ordnance Department proposed a vehicle capable of destroying massive bunkers and surviving direct hits from German 88mm guns. Initially, it wasn't even classified as a tank. It was called a gun motor carriage, designed primarily for one purpose: to carry an enormous 105mm T5E1 gun into battle and withstand anything the enemy could throw at it. But this was no ordinary armored vehicle. The T-28 was to weigh over 95 tons, that's more than twice the weight of a modern M1 Abrams tank. Its frontal armor was 12 inches thick, designed to be virtually impenetrable. On paper, it looked unstoppable. However, that incredible armor came with serious trade-offs. First, mobility. With a top speed of barely 8 miles per hour, the T-28 was painfully slow. Its massive weight made it impossible to transport easily, and it couldn't cross most European bridges. Even soft ground posed a problem. The tank could easily sink into mud or soil under its own weight. To deal with this, engineers came up with an ingenious, if complicated, solution. The T-28 had not one, but two sets of tracks on each side. This quadruple-track system distributed the tank's immense weight more evenly, reducing ground pressure and allowing it to move, at least in theory, across terrain that would have swallowed other heavy vehicles. What's more, the outer tracks could actually be removed to make transportation easier. The crew could detach them and turn the tank into a slightly narrower, though still massive, vehicle. Of course, this process wasn't simple. It required cranes, tools, and several hours of hard labor. But it showed just how far the designers were willing to go to make the T-28 somewhat practical. Inside, the T-28 was a cramped steel furnace. The crew consisted of just 4 men: a commander, a gunner, a loader, and a driver. There was no turret. The main gun was fixed directly into the hull, meaning the entire tank had to turn to aim. This made the T-28 less flexible in combat but simplified the design and reduced the height of the vehicle, giving it a lower profile. Powering this steel monster was a Ford GAF V8 gasoline engine, producing around 500 horsepower. That might sound like a lot, but for a tank that weighed nearly 100 tons, it was barely enough. The power-to-weight ratio was dismal, just 5 horsepower per ton, even less than a modern bulldozer. Moving this behemoth was an exercise in patience. Still, on the battlefield envisioned by its designers, one dominated by slow, brutal assaults on fortifications, speed wasn't the priority. Survivability and firepower were, and on that front, the T-28 delivered. Its 105mm gun was capable of firing massive armor-piercing shells that could destroy concrete bunkers and pierce enemy armor at long range. With up to 62 rounds of ammunition on board, it was built for prolonged engagements. Supporting it were .50 caliber machine guns for anti-infantry defense. Though these were mostly secondary, the T-28 was designed to destroy fortresses, not chase down soldiers. By late 1944, the prototypes began to take shape. 2 vehicles were built by Pacific Car and Foundry in 1945. But by then, history had already started to move faster than the T-28 could. The atomic bombings of Japan and the end of World War II rendered the T-28's purpose obsolete almost overnight. There were no longer any heavily fortified German lines to breach, no enemy bunkers demanding a rolling fortress. The war was over, and the need for such a massive, specialized vehicle had vanished. Still, testing continued. At the Aberdeen Proving Grounds in Maryland, the T-28 lumbered through its trials. It was slow, cumbersome, and hard to maintain, but it worked surprisingly well for something so massive. It demonstrated impressive firepower and armor protection, though it was clear that it could never be deployed efficiently in a modern, mobile army. After testing, one of the two prototypes was sent to Yuma Proving Ground in Arizona for further evaluation. Unfortunately, during transportation, one of the tanks was destroyed in a fire, leaving just one surviving example of the T28 in existence. For years, the surviving tank was lost. People assumed it had been scrapped, forgotten, or buried somewhere in storage. Then, in 1974, it was rediscovered by accident, sitting quietly in the woods at Fort Belvoir, Virginia. Covered in rust but still intact, it was an incredible find. The tank was later restored and eventually moved to the Patton Museum of Cavalry and Armor at Fort Knox, Kentucky, where it remains one of the most striking exhibits in American tank history. Standing next to it, you can really grasp the sheer absurdity of its size. Nearly 11 meters long, almost 5 meters wide, and over 3 meters tall, it looks less like a tank and more like a building on tracks. The armor plates are so thick, they could easily stop most anti-tank weapons of the era. But as impressive as it was, the T28 also represents the limits of tank design. It's a reminder that more armor and bigger guns aren't always the answer. The tank's immense weight made it a logistical nightmare. It couldn't fit on standard transport ships, and moving it by rail required special flat cars. On a real battlefield, it would have struggled to keep up with other units, and its lack of a rotating turret meant it was vulnerable to faster, more mobile enemies. By the time the Cold War began, military thinking had shifted. Speed, mobility, and versatility became the new priorities. Super heavy tanks like the T-28 were replaced by main battle tanks, vehicles that could balance firepower, protection, and agility in one platform. In a way, the T-28 was the last gasp of an old idea, that you could build an invincible machine of war through sheer mass and armor thickness. It was a concept born from the horrors of trench warfare and fortified lines, but in the age of mechanized warfare and nuclear weapons, it was simply too slow, too specialized, and too heavy to matter. Yet, even as a failed weapon, the T-28 is a fascinating piece of engineering. It shows the extremes that military designers were willing to explore in the pursuit of battlefield dominance. It's the embodiment of, what if the war had dragged on longer? What if the Allies had needed to storm more heavily fortified positions? The T-28 might have found its moment. Today, the T-28 stands as a symbol of ambition and excess, a steel monument to human ingenuity and overengineering. It reminds us that innovation doesn't always mean success, but every experiment, even a failed one, teaches something valuable. For the U.S. Army, the lesson was clear: the future of armored warfare wasn't in building bigger tanks, but smarter ones. And that philosophy would guide tank development for decades to come. The T-28 never fired a shot in anger. It never saw battle, but in its towering presence and incredible design, it captures a unique moment in history, when engineers and generals dreamed of unstoppable machines, and the boundaries of possibility were pushed to their limits. The T-28 Super Heavy Tank, a giant that never fought, but never forgotten. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more deep dives into rare and forgotten military vehicles, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Let us know in the comments, what other legendary tanks would you like us to cover next? Would you like me to tailor this script for a specific tone, for example, more cinematic and dramatic like dark docs or real-life lore, or more casual and informative like the armchair historian or history guy? I can adjust the pacing and style accordingly.